If you get any gaps in your texture along the UV borders, then this is likely caused by the lack of edge padding. Remember that you can add edge padding in Maya and XNormal automatically to the bakes. Alternatively, you can add it yourself in Photoshop, which is what I like to do. In this example, you can see I'm going to add edge padding to these shapes here. So if you have XNormal installed, then there's the dilation filter here. If you open it up, it'll ask you how much in pixels, how much dilation you want. And I generally pick a pretty large number. In this case, I have 32 pixels. I mean, it's probably not necessary to go quite that high, but there's a saying that there is no such thing as having too much edge padding. So if I say do it, you can see what it did. And what it's doing basically is taking the edge pixel and then extending it out the specified distance. Now, the reason why I like to add it myself is because there are times when I'm texturing where I like to have the original shape that I can easily select that follows the UV boundaries, and that's mostly because, let's say I'm texturing something, and then I check it in the game, and then it looks like things still aren't going right up to the edges. Then at least I know exactly where that edge is, so that I can make sure I can target those areas very precisely. And then after that, I can just go ahead and take the end result and dilate it again, because dilation doesn't have to be just with normal maps. It can be with anything, any kind of pixel data you can dilate. Just have it on its own layer, and it'll work for you. Maybe that's not the best reason to do it in Photoshop, but it's just a quirk to how I like to work. The danger of doing it this way, though, is that you will want to have all of your pieces baked and merged down before you run the dilation, because in this case, let's say I baked these two shapes separately. If I dilate each of them independently, you can see what happens is, if I had the dilation distance too high, what could happen is one might start eating over into the other shape, and then what you'd have to do is you kind of have to go and manually, kind of tone it back, and that's just something like I would rather not have to deal with. So usually what I do is I'll make sure all of my bakes are done, and then I'll merge that one layer, and then I'll run the dilation, and you can see what it does is it will automatically meet up somewhere in the middle, and then I won't have to worry about having to edit those areas myself. And one more thing to add about edge padding is, especially in regards to the normal map, you want this to be the last thing you do after you are positive that your normal map is working the way it should. Because, at least for the way I do things, since I derive my cavity and edge information from my normal map, then if I make that prematurely before I do the edge padding, then what will happen is I'll get lines along the edges of my UV borders, which is what I don't want. I want to calculate that cavity map based off of this data, so that these edges, when it makes the lines, it won't be within the UV borders. to give an example of what I mean by that, let's say I flatten this and I get this ready to run my action here. You see it filled it with the wrong color, that's fine. I can okay, so let's say that this is the cavity that it baked. If I go back to the point where, to here, you can see here that when I overlay this, or maybe I'll just 50% it. Hold on. Yeah, so this is what I mean. These dark lines from the cavity edge, I want that to be outside of the UV borders. And if I had done this before the dilation, then what would happen is those dark lines would be basically right along this edge, which is where the UV borders are, and it would show up on the model as lines, and that'd be very undesirable.